It was odd enough seeing a teenage girl evaporate into thin air with nothing but a branch for concealment, but it was still weirder when we heard her voice coming through the gap in the branches. "All right, it worked out. Come on through." It wasn't until that moment that it really hit me. There is magic in this world, and I'm about to use it. Brian steps forward next, with more confidence than usual, feeling his way up the branch on tiptoe before pulling himself up as well. Without hesitation, he dropped down on the other side of the branch, letting out a small grunt when he hit the ground. For the record, in most places I'm going to avoid any mention of romantic goings-on between myself and Colette, and will get her permission in all other cases. I kissed her hard and passionately then, steeling myself to climb the tree. I don't have many memories of genuine fear, but this was definitely one of them, though it was mixed with an equal measure of excitement. Do they have an emotion for that? When I reached up and grabbed the branch to the right, I had every intention of simply going up and over, quick, easy, and safe. But as soon as my feet left the ground, my temperament changed entirely. Choice of words, courtesy of Brian. The fear melted away, and I found myself daring, adventurous, reckless. I liked it. From the ground, all that could be seen between the branches of Wendlord was more branches, leaves, and some sun peeking through. Looking around from up in the tree, however, I could see far more. Before me, where I knew my fear and cowardice had assured me was the only reasonable destination, I saw Lyra checking out a small cut Brian had just acquired while landing. I looked past the next branch, and it was, as Lyra said, the tree seemed to be growing at the very edge of a great canyon. Peering over the edge, I was shocked to see the roots growing out of the cliff's side, just as perfectly geometric as the branches above, hanging in the air hundreds of feet above a barren, lifeless plain. As the realization of what I was seeing began to sink in, I turned still further, my back to Lyra, and saw another entirely disparate ground stretching before me. Grass, greener than any I'd seen in my life, grew beautiful and peaceful on a meadow before my eyes. Wildflowers, such as I'd never seen before, swaying in a gentle breeze, grew untended and unorganized, each the envy of the greatest gardeners our world has ever known. A small brook flowed noiselessly, not 20 feet from where I crouched in the tree. The sight of such unhindered vitality drove all caution from my mind, and I was on the verge of jumping down to join it all, when I felt someone grab the back of my shirt and pull me backwards. I crashed on my back, my head cushioned by the tent I was still holding. I rolled off of Lyra, scrambled to my feet, muttering, "Thanks." I then called to Colette, "Keep your eyes closed. It'll be easier that way." My advice turned out to be less useful than I thought, fueling her curiosity rather than quenching it, and she still zoned out once she was in sight. She managed to come down on her own, though, and she's still gloating about that. Fortunately for Brian, Colette had thought to bring some first aid and gave him a small bandage. Apparently he had slipped coming down from the tree. Jack's off to make supper, so it's just me and Brian for a bit. I didn't see what Jack saw through the gates, and Brian obviously didn't either, but we both felt that weird floaty sensation. It reminded me a bit of Imperio. It felt good. You never really know how much pain and fear and responsibility you carry everywhere you go until it's lifted off your shoulders. Backing up a bit from where Jack left off, when I was up in the tree before jumping down, I saw the sea to the south in Lyra's world. It was still miles away, and I've seen the Atlantic before, but the way the midday sunlight shimmered off the waves and into my pseudo-drugged-up eyes, it's a memory I think I'll always cherish. It was the easiest thing in the world to leap down into Jack's arms. From the ground, the view of the sea was obscured by more trees, but the wind from the south brought the smell of sea salt, and some welcome warmth. After ditching our jackets on a low-hanging branch, we started making our way south. The trip itself was rather uneventful, but Lyra did tell a rather interesting story. Shortly after leaving the gate of Wendlord, I still say that's a silly name for a tree, Lyra started singing. I'm guessing that Jack has already mentioned it, music nerd that he is, but Lyra's voice is incredible. If you can imagine Apollo as a girl, you're in the right ballpark. Or opera house, I guess. We'd heard Lyra sing before, she's in our school's choir, but we'd never heard her sing in her language before. It was magnificent. I noticed, however, that as she sang and walked, she drifted slowly to the right. I didn't want to interrupt her song, so I didn't mention it until she finished. Her reply caught me off guard. "Just being polite. Uncle Ty doesn't like people trespassing." Your uncle? Brian asked. Do your families not get along? No, we get along just fine. He's been teaching my sister how to hunt, actually. He doesn't even live anywhere near here. He just doesn't like anyone else getting near him. The emphasis on the last word was begging for inquiry, and Jack obliged. Who's him? He is a legend in my home, the second greatest horror story in our history. His name is Vadim von Korth, but few people use that name anymore. We call him Blood Tongue. He's a vampire. I stopped short. Hold on. A vampire? Like blood-sucking, sun-hating demon thingies? Yes, I used the term thingies, not my proudest moment. They're a metaphor for sex, or STDs. They aren't real. They can't be real. Why not? Brian countered. We've met a wizard, and we aren't even in our plane anymore. Why not vampires? The same reason I don't believe in werewolves, aliens, or zombies. The unlikely reality of one myth doesn't make the rest more likely, I said. Well, actually, no, I didn't say that. I've been thinking about that in the days in between. What I actually said was more along the lines of, because. I'm more eloquent in my mind. Brian turned his attention back towards Lyra. So, vampires are good in daylight. Crap, I need practice at this. And I really shouldn't be using a pen. After I said thingies, Lyra cut in, saying, Dunno about demons, and I'm pretty positive he's good with the sun, but yeah, he's been known to drink blood. After which Brian and I had our little spat, and Brian said, So vampires are good in daylight. Anything else we should know about this Blood Tongue guy if we run into him? Lyra bit her lip. I've never actually met him, but I've read everything our library says about him, though I have to admit it isn't much. About 30 years before I was born, a handsome, well-dressed man with holy black eyes walked into Kingscliff from the north, dragging behind him something like a man. The thing's skin was deep, dark gray, stretched tightly over its bones, every rib protruding from its chest, every vertebrae visible down its spine. Its eyes were shriveled, loose in their sockets. Its lips appeared to have been cut from its face, leaving its mouth unbalanced, its teeth perpetually bared. For all the world, it seemed a desecrated corpse, were it not screaming in agony and flailing to release its ankle from the black-eyed man's grasp. It was feral, wild, and terrifying. All the college was in a panic, thinking that the wall had been breached. The man with black eyes ignored them, walking directly to the royal palace. He stopped only when confronted by the wizard Serakim at the gate. Serakim used to visit more back in those days. The man clapped Serakim on the shoulder as if they were old friends, and they entered the castle together. The next day, the king called for the only glassmith in town and his apprentice, Melissa, and gave them a task. Modify one of the guest rooms in the castle, coating every surface in mirrors. That glassmith has died, but the Melissa is still around. She made me this necklace after she told me the story, Lyra said, fingering a small, ornate amulet hanging from her neck. It took her and her teacher 3 weeks, coating the walls, doors, ceiling, and floors, before Serakim deemed it satisfactory, and explained what this was all about. After Serakim led him to the throne room, the man with the black eyes told King Daniel that he had been researching the abomination he held, but had grown weary of its presence, and no longer wished to keep it about. Nevertheless, he did not wish to inflict it upon the public, so he was leaving it with Serakim. He also said that it would be easier to control around mirrors, and with that... Wait, the creature, monster, whatever, that's the vampire? Jack broke in. I figured it was the black-eyed, well-dressed guy. Yeah, I suppose I was accidentally a bit misleading there, wasn't I? Lyra said with a cheeky little smirk that said it was anything but accidental. But then her expression twisted upside down. Where was I? Not vampire was leaving vampire with the wizard, I said, trying to accept the absurdity of my statement. Right. Bloodtongue was dragged into the room with all the mirrors, and the door was shut. And then nothing happened. People talked about it once in a while when the rumor well went dry, but eventually they stopped really caring. Everybody knew and accepted that deep in the castle there was something like a human, but it didn't matter. Serakim was taking care of it. And if you can't trust Serakim, you don't live in the Four Kales. Years went by without incident. No deaths among the people, and I've never heard of anyone that gave blood in any way. People started to think the blood tongue had died. Nobody ever gave it any food. The few people that went to that part of the castle never heard a peep from it. It seemed the mirrors really worked. That's Jack calling for supper. Back in a bit. Turns out Brian's parents asked for him to come home early. Apparently his dad was recently called out of town. I don't know the details. So we'll resume this tomorrow, since Brian is best at remembering exactly how conversations go. He should be coming over tomorrow, so we'll continue then.